ethics has been a conversation that's popped up in my professional life forever. And I was recalling in the earlier meeting today that when I was about 16 or 17, maybe, at a youth group conference, for some reason, the adults asked me to give a talk on values and ethics, which was pretty crazy. But I did, and apparently I said something useful. I don't remember what I said. And here we are these years later. And somehow I wound up on the independent review board. So the independent review board is part of ICF's effort to be a self-regulating profession in coaching. And that's taken very seriously. One of the things that the independent review board contributes for people who say, well, we'd love to regulate coaching, is that we can say we have a way of dealing with coaches who stray outside the lines, if you will, and behave unethically, or they are, accused of doing something unethical. And that's a really important standard for a profession to have. One of the things that, so what happens? What is it? There is the ECR, the ethical review, ethics code review, right? And when a client or a coach or a person or a sponsor says, I'm not happy with the way this coaching is going, they fill out a formal complaint form and send it to Kristen, actually. And after that, the next thing that happens is that the leadership group, the two vice chairs and the chair and the ICF staff meet and say, does this look like there's a chance that there is something ethical involved here that is coaching ethics? And many times we say, yes, we think there is, and that triggers the rest of the process. And there's also times when we say, no, this doesn't really fit. And so here's a place for you to take your complaint that might be more appropriate. And sometimes there's some advising that occurs from the ICF staff. If we say that there should be an ethical review, then we tap our members. How many members do we have in the IRB, Kristen, at the moment?
Oh gosh, aren't there at least 12?
At least 12, and we're adding several more this coming year. Then we set up an investigation team, and they talk to all the relevant parties and produce a report saying, yep, we think this particular standard, ethical standard, in fact was breached. If that's the conclusion, and oftentimes it's not, well, often, so I don't know the statistics, but sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. If it is found to be a problem, then there's a remedial action established. Might be some continuing education, might be some mentoring, might be supervision of their coaching for a while, or work with a supervisor. It might be doing some research and reporting back the results. In the very worst case, when the coach says, nope, not interested in doing that, I don't care what you think, the IRB has the power to recommend revocation of their credentials and membership. That's kind of the nasty one, which I'd rather not happen. Our approach has really evolved to be a developmental one. We think it is extremely rare for any coach to intentionally do something wrong. We just don't think that's the nature of coaching. And so what we want is an educational developmental attitude toward ethics. Why don't I stop there with those details, and you guys guide me? Do you want to have some Q&A, or do you want to dive into your spectacular case studies?
So Sam, I think we're going to let them dive into the case studies, and we're going to let you go silent for probably about 20, 25 minutes. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to come back together. And so how we're going to do the case studies is, for those of you that may have noticed, you have something on the back of your badge, and you have a word that's associated kind of with what our theme has been. And I have some leaders that are going to take you to another spot in the room, and you're going to be able to sit down with your group and attack the case study that's been assigned to your group. Okay, if you happen to get done, then you can move on to the last case study, number 4. So you've got kind of a bonus case study, but we want to make sure that we get through the primary case study first. For or is Marcelo. Where are you, Marcelo? Right here. Where are you going to take your group? So
this side.
This side. Anybody with or, please follow Marcelo over here, and that will comprise the or group.
Or.
All right. And Kim, you have bow. Okay, where are you going, Kim?
Bow. All right, we're here.
You're going to be right there. Okay, so bow.
Kim.
Amal, you have forward. Where are you going to go? Over into this corner to the right. So everybody with forward, follow Amal.
Right over here, moving forward.
And Bob, where are you at? Bob, you have stern. Where are you going to be? Right there. Okay. Stern is over here. And Jaslyn, you have crew. Yep, Jaslyn's crew. Are you coming over on this side? Okay. And ahead with Annetta. So anyone with a... Thank you, Sam.
You bet.
Well, you guys, I don't know if you want to stop the recording while we do this so that we don't have a lot of blank air. I'm really curious, Janice and I, about, the discussions that you had, and we're going to start with case study 1, and this is going to be the format that we're going to run with today. Is that because we had 2 different groups working on each of the case studies, we're going to ask a member of that group to come up and share a little bit about what that case study represented to them, what conclusions they might have had, some of the thoughts, some of the things they might have struggled with, and just really kind of let's put this out on the table. Sam and Kristen have had the benefit of looking over those case studies, and we've asked specifically that with Sam and his expertise of sitting on the board, that he may have some challenging questions to throw back at us or at you, or things to take away and think about. And then we're going to move on to the next one. So just keep in interest of time, we want to at least make it through the first 3. And if we hit up against the clock, we're probably going to cut it at that point, because 4 was optional. And so we want to make sure that we go deep on the first 3. Okay? All right, so I'm gonna let Janice start us out.
Okay, and one of the things when you come up as the leader from your group or the person who's summarizing, if there was one thing that really stood out to you that was like a red flag for you, let us know that as well. So we'll start out with the or and the bow group. So if the or group would like to come up first and give us their thoughts on case 1.
So I get to do the crash landing first, so everybody will look good after me. But so should I read this, or?
Do you want to see her, or do you want her facing us? What do you think?
I think you're talking to the folks, right?
Perfect. Good. Thank you.
I'm for the people. So should I read this case study?
No. You missed that
Give us
part.
the highlights.
Just the highlights. What you're
Okay.
confused about?
So basically in this case study, there's, can I ask one question? Who wrote these case studies?
Wonderful, brilliant people from far, far away.
Okay. Because this, I'm a master coach for a global company, so that's the case study I got. So this is a little personal. So I was wondering, Someone's spying on me.
Do you resonate with?
So anyways, in this scenario, there's a global consulting firm that has a 6-month engagement of selling coaching. So what they did is they marketed getting employees for this, coaches, which half of them are independent contractors. The master coach is not ICF certified. And the master coach plays the role as the account manager, the liaison with communications. After they got into the engagement, turns out stakeholders and other people in the organization wanted to know, they didn't want the confidentiality there. However, discussions had happened. There were several discussions where there would be confidentiality. This case study did not give us information if there were signed agreements. So we made some assumptions that the coaches were not necessarily privy to those conversations that went on with the master coach. So there was a lack of congruence. So the first issue that we found was with the organization itself, their onboarding process, framing up the engagement, and making it clear what it would look like. Also, I left out a piece that they were teaching. They were being told what to teach each time they went into these coaching sessions. So the biggest issue that all of the group agreed on was just the beginning process of how this all went down. There was not clarity on what it looked like. There was not congruence on whether there was confidentiality, whether there was not confidentiality, which sometimes a coachee and a stakeholder will agree they're transparent. Most of the time they don't. But the master coach who wasn't ICF certified, so we debated that. Well, is that really an issue? Because there's other bodies out there that follow the same ethics as ICF.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to pick a clip right there. She's done a good job of introducing the case and sharing some of what her group thought. But we also have a BOW group who did that case. So let's see if they have some additional points to complement the points that she brought up, okay? So with the BOW group come up.
Okay.
And then if he doesn't have.
You better watch out.
Well, I don't know if I can speak for the whole group, but because many of the points, as you said, were it depends and we made assumptions and so on. I wonder whether the question we were supposed to answer is if there is a breach of an ethical rule there. And maybe the first thing to notice is that there would be a breach only for ICF coaches. The non-ICF coaches obviously would not be interested to what an ICF rule is. So we would first look at that. Secondly, is when there is a breach of an ethical rule, and it's when occasionally the coach exhibit a behavior other than coaching. So it's okay to teach occasionally, as long as is clear that you're teaching and not coaching. So provided there is clarity as to what you're doing in that moment, it's okay. And if it's occasional. And occasional depends on the context. So how long is the session, how long is the program, et cetera, et cetera. So one needs to go into the details of this. When it comes to the confidentiality point, yeah, pretty much what you said is what have I agreed with. There is no breach in sharing plans as long as you're sharing something that has been, the content of which has been agreed with your coachee. So I would say a good practice is to receive a written statement from your coachee as to what you are allowed to share and not to share that you want to put into the plan. Now, the other point about the sharing with a colleague, then of course there are variations of views, etc. So maybe some of my colleagues here in the group might have different opinions. But first of all, if I'm receiving info, I'm not breaching because I receive info. If someone is telling me something about their clients, I'm hearing, and I'm not breaching anything because of that. what I do with that info, that's another story. But here they're saying, have challenges related to the coaching assignment they compare with other coaches in the cohort. So if I'm the one that is sharing, I can share that, for example, depends on what I'm sharing. If I share that my coach is not showing up for coaching, it's different than the content of, whatever it is that is actually breaching confidentiality. So that's
Okay, as you're taking a breath. Let's give them some love for the ideas that they're going forward like you. And now we have an opportunity for you to hear some questions that Sam may have for you. Hey, Sam.
Can I say one thing before we go forward? Because I gave you all those details, and of course I didn't get all the details I want before I hit the bottom line. But the bottom line was, at the end of the day, the coach that is ICF, the responsibility to uphold their ethics or have those courageous conversations is what needs to be happening. Because according to the scenario, they're already stuck in it. They can't go back to the beginning. So what do you do next?
Okay, so Sam, do you have an answer to her question and other questions that you have for them?
Well, the bottom line there is where I was too. That we can say for a coach operating in this environment and having agreed to operate in this environment, what are their vulnerabilities? What are they vulnerable to? And you've identified the one that it's up to the ICF coach to adhere to values and standards and practices. That they're the ones who have a credential, right? So ultimately, it is always up to the individual. And to be sensitive to the kinds of things that are going to push on their values and push on their boundaries. Most problems, ethical problems, the vast majority start from bad contracting. And so when I accept a job in a company like this as a coach, am I fully aware of the demands that I will have to make to the sponsor in order to set up the proper framework for me to function? This case identifies the sharing of coaching plans and so on. And as you said, there needs to be some agreement. I would say that a coach should never share plans, but should facilitate a process for the client to share plans.
Yeah. Amen. Thank you. Amen. All day, every day.
Okay, very good.
Let's give everybody a hand. Okay, so we're ready for the second group. And so if we could have Forward come up, who's going to represent us for Forward? Oh, wonderful. We'll let you start out.
Oh boy.
Okay.
Okay. Lovely.
Get
All
me
right.
this one.
So for this case, it was really about a client who had a relationship with a coach to coach them on some business component. And then throughout that discussion, turns out that, well, that client is getting engaged and getting married, and they wanted also some coaching on the relationship. So they brought in the fiance, and they agreed to have a trial agreement over having that kind of discussion. So they were also, so in addition to the business that they were having originally, they also were having another, agreement for having that relationship kind of coaching. At one point or another, the original client decided that, well, something is not right. I want to have one-on-one with my coach. I just want to chat with my coach. And she did. And before that took place, the coach had asked if it was okay with the fiance for them to have the one-on-one without the fiance being involved. And the client said, yes, it was. So the coach did not think much in terms of, well, because they have developed a good relationship by that time. So they did not think in terms of, oh, well, I need to go make sure that it's okay. So when the fiance found out, he was upset. So that's the case. As far as the discussion that we had, and feel free, Forward team, to jump in and speak up. We thought that was a violation because even though there was an agreement, the agreement was there for all three of them to be together. And even though there was a breach there, the coach should have also tapped into the fiancé just to be sure that it was okay for them to have that kind of conversation. And in addition to that, we also have thought that, well, maybe to begin with, those two should have been separate conversations to be, two separate contracts altogether, and that would have eliminated any potential, misunderstandings. Yeah. Anything else, forward team? Feel free to. Anything else that you feel?
All right, let's bring Stern up.
We said the same thing.
Yeah.
One other thing that we brought up is this client is working with the coach already in a business capacity. So once you step over that line into coaching relationships too, is a line that you probably don't want to step over.
Yeah.
Is that? This was really, one of the things that we said in our group is it would be nice to have a case study that was something you really had to scratch deeper to get to the edge. This is self-evident, it's real easy, and maybe that's what you're trying to get us to do, but maybe there's a meteor one here. We just got the wrong one.
So, Sam, what do you think? Because this actually was one that we got from Global.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I was wondering if there's a little bit more to this that you might be able to share.
I think this is a meaty one. Excuse me. And the reason I say that is because the entire case is wrapped up in what the gentleman just said. Coach and a client have a partnership in which they're working in a business capacity. This case is about inadequate and badly maintained boundaries. And so we have a parallel process here between their initial relationship and the expansion and then contraction of the relationship, including the fiance. So it's all about ethical boundaries. Another thing that's contained in this case is the competence of the coach. Is the coach operating within an arena of competence? Coaching on business issues is vastly different from coaching about marital relationship or engagement issues. The dynamics are radically different. The possibilities of projections and transference and manipulation and seduction are completely different when you're working with a romantic relationship. So is the coach prepared to deal with that? Evidently not, from their behavior. But perhaps the most important thing is that first sentence in which we can see that this coach doesn't manage boundaries very well. And that's a big problem.
So to your point, there was a little bit deeper itch there. So yeah, a little bit more meat then. Right. Okay, well, thank you very much.
We're going to do case study 3, and we need for a spokesperson from Crew and a head to come up.
Come on.
Feel like I'm on Family Feud. Like, all right, first answer. Go for the field. Oh, she's just giving it right up. Okay.
No, you said you're ahead and I'm Crew.
Well, Bob wanted a meaty one, and you should go for number 3 because this feels like a Common Core math problem with 4 different people over 4 different timelines. We spent a lot of time just trying to break this one apart, but the way we kind of, and tell me if I got this wrong because we're still trying to summarize the case study, but it appears that there was a coaching contract that was done and completed for 2 employees, and after the contract was completed, another employee came to give feedback on one of the coachees about how he noticed the change after the coaching contract. And then that conversation extended into a 4th employee, not covered under the contract, doing illegal activity at the company and stealing supplies for moonlighting contracts or doing work outside of the for themselves outside of the company, but using company resources that were being used. So we found it interesting because it was really right on the balancing line that it actually would not be a breach to report it to the company because you are not under the confidentiality of your coaching contract. But because it was completely outside of the contract and the contract had already expired, there really didn't seem to be a strong requirement to report it either. So we kind of summarized the idea that we would suggest to the HR person, which it says down at the bottom, you do know the HR person, that perhaps accounting and inventory should do an audit of their resources to see if that they could discover this for themselves. Because in the contract, the case study is very small. There was no motivation for this third employee to rat out the fourth employee. He didn't want to get caught into a give or take. So without kind of understanding that motivation, it seemed like we were going to get sucked into something that was beyond our coaching and what we were doing.
Okay, so I'll add to that then.
Great.
Okay, so so there are 4 employees. Number 3 was the one that came in and told you what was going on, and that he was part of the moonlighting as well. So the moonlighting and the stealing are being done by both of these employees in their moonlighting job.
Mm-hmm.
Neither of those employees are under contract to you, but your coaching contract is with the board of directors of the organization. So what our team kind of came down to was that we are beholden to the organization and the board of directors who pays the bill to see that in this situation, there is potentially a policy that governs who's allowed to moonlight and who isn't. And there certainly should be a policy around stealing, because we don't know if they're talking about note paper and pens, or they're talking about copper wires and, you know, large supply type things. We have no idea what
the value of the theft.
Yeah, we don't know what Acme does, you know. A number of times we've seen the name Acme, you know, under different circumstances. It could be almost anything. So we felt that rather than going back to Bob, the client, post the engagement to say you've got a problem on your team, that this was really a corporate matter dealing with corporate policy, and that, back me up if I'm going off too far here, but I think staying on the reservation, that we thought that HR was in the best position to deal with this confidentially, because they will know what the policy is regarding moonlighting. They will certainly know what the ethical policy is around employee stealing things, and will know what to do. And it also preserves our relationship as a coach within the organization, that we were not the ones ratting out employees to our boss, and that HR can figure out how to run a confidential project that looks into this, any more than if it were sexual harassment or any domestic violence or any other potentially illegal activity that an employee selling drugs. I mean, just imagine anything that's going on in engagement that has nothing to do with our engagement, but has to do with the corporation's responsibility to the community.
Yeah, it was a corporate boundaries problem, not necessarily with the coaching contract.
Exactly.
So it was just having them go back to look at that.
Did I? Okay.
So the question for Sam is, do you agree with the way they have deconstructed the case? And do you see any ethical dilemmas or issues, either from the coaching, consulting, friend of the organization point of view?
I think they're onto the core material. Where I began to go as I read it and then listened to you is, what is the bigger ethical material at stake here? You know, we need to focus on contracting and confidentiality and disclosure and so on. You're also touching on the primary relationship, which is with the board of directors. I agree completely with that. But what is a coach's responsibility from a higher ethical perspective? We're not dealing just with the code. We're dealing with a realm of ethics. We can talk in terms of what is our responsibility as coaches to clients, responsibility to sponsors, responsibility to the community, you touched on that briefly, responsibility to society, responsibility to the profession. That expands it from did I violate code 23 to the bigger sense of ethics. And if we hold coaching to be a highly ethical profession, we need what some authors have referred to as ethical maturity, sensitivity to ethics. Who could be adversely affected by these facts, by these events? As identified in the case, there are times when in the agreements when confidentiality can be broken, and that includes illegal activity. So the question becomes, to whom? Is it to HR? Is it to the board of directors? I think it would be something that all of us would want to have a good conversation with our sponsor, in this case, the board of directors. Let's talk about how all this stuff works and be clear about the boundaries of my responsibilities. And oh, by the way, board of directors, if I encounter illegal activity or the possibility of self-harm, you know, like potential suicide that I'm concerned about, I'm going to report it to you, because that's my responsibility to individuals. No, that's some ideas here. What is your response to what I've just suggested?
So I think what our team also talked about was, if this ever became an employee lawsuit where the company fired these two employees and the employees were in court and said, well, I told so-and-so, I told the coach. So David told on Evan that they were stealing, and maybe he did that to say it to a neutral third party so that he wasn't ever pointed the finger at, but he could just as easily turn around and point the finger at you in a courtroom. Mm-hmm. And so maybe that's too much of my HR hat coming out, but I don't want to be in a court of law saying I knew but did not have the maturity to figure out what to do with it.
Yeah, I'm in the same spot with that. And I would also, as the coach, want to use competency number 7, direct communication. When I get this information, I would say, you know, this is not okay. This is not okay. And you need to report the illegal activity. Don't be transferring it on me because I'm a safe here. Sorry, I don't want it. Deal with it. And if I don't find out that you dealt with it, I will report it.
Yeah, reopen the conversation that said here that it was ended too quickly, but that would be the proper end to it. Be like, come back here, let's just, you need to go do something about it. Or
don't you put that monkey on my back.
Is the other side of it, I think. We need to disclose that we will if you don't.
Yes.
Yeah, it's more.
You take action or I will.
It's more.
Okay, we have a comment.
For me, it's more to wrap it up. I put it on my contract. It's like a little clause saying, if you're doing self-harm or if there's something illegal, this will break the confidentiality. Or if I'm called to court to report something that's happening in a conversation, I have to tell them. So that you get it out of the way from the very beginning of your agreement so that they know. And that way, when it shows up, then you're already one step ahead of the conversation. Because
there was no agreement for a person, just a random person that jumped in the picture.
There's no agreement with this person.
With
the
this
original
person.
contract
Okay.
was fulfilled and expired.
okay, I'm just bringing it for when they're,
Yeah.
when you do your agreement with your clients,
Yeah.
just put it in there and you get it out of the way, whether it's one-on-one or just.
And again, it's up to the individual ICF coach to set the standards of practice wherever they are.
Very good. Let's thank this group.
Bring the love.
So, Sam, thank you very much for your time, your expertise, and your knowledge. We're very blessed to have you. And Kristen, thank you for helping to facilitate the discussion that we had. Hopefully this was beneficial going through some of these case stories and then hearing the perspective, from the independent review board. We really appreciate your time.
I think it's just terrific what you're doing in the Southeast and the collection of chapters and the case studies. Very impressive, and good on you for taking it so seriously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And as a bonus, for those of you, if you didn't take notice, there are certificates for you to take at the counter up there. You get one core competency CCU for today, and it's in ethics, which is great. We always like to have that. So make sure that you pick that up on the way out. It's available to